The old Briarwood Hospital had been abandoned for more than 2 decades, but people in the nearby town still whispered about the things that supposedly lingered in its crumbling halls. Most dismissed the stories as urban legends: nurses who never left their posts, screams echoing from the operating rooms at night, lights flickering when no power had run through the building in years. But when Ethan and his 2 friends decided to sneak inside on a Friday night, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something they shouldn't. The moment they crossed the rusted front gates, the air grew unnaturally still, as though the outside world no longer reached this place. Inside, the corridors were lined with peeling paint, broken gurneys, and faded patient files scattered across the floor. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of glass under their sneakers. Ethan's friend Tyler laughed nervously and joked about how they'd find a ghost in a nurse's outfit, but the sound of his voice felt wrong here, like it didn't belong. They passed by a surgery wing where the old metal doors were warped and bent, as if someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. Ethan paused, staring at the deep scratches across the steel. They weren't just random marks. They were desperate, frantic, and human. They pressed deeper into the hospital, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness. Every hallway looked the same, stretching on into shadows that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. On the 3rd floor, they came across a nurse's station, still covered in yellowed charts and a coffee mug that looked as though it had been left behind only yesterday. Ethan touched one of the clipboards, but the second his fingers brushed it, an icy chill ran up his arm. He yanked his hand back and swore he heard something faint, a whisper, too low to make out, but close enough to raise the hairs on the back of his neck. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, but his friends shook their heads. Tyler was already moving on, while Lisa nervously scanned the hall with her light. They reached a patient room with its door slightly ajar. Ethan pushed it open, and the beam of his flashlight caught on something that made all 3 of them freeze. There was a figure sitting upright in the bed. Pale, gaunt, and unmoving. The skin looked stretched too tightly across the bones, like parchment over a skeleton. Its hollow eyes reflected the light and Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew it couldn't be alive, yet it was there, sitting as if waiting for them. Tyler muttered, "It's just a mannequin," but his voice wavered. He stepped closer, reached out, and before Ethan could stop him, tapped the figure's shoulder. That's when its head snapped toward them with a sound like cracking bone. The mouth opened impossibly wide, releasing a guttural moan that didn't sound human. The lights on their flashlights flickered violently, plunging the room in and out of darkness. In the brief flashes, Ethan saw the thing rising from the bed, its limbs jerking unnaturally, its movements broken like a puppet being yanked by unseen strings. They bolted from the room, their footsteps pounding down the hallway. The hospital seemed alive now, groaning with echoes that chased them wherever they ran. Doors slammed shut on their own, windows rattled, and that same guttural moan followed them from corridor to corridor. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to remember the way back, but every hallway twisted and turned differently than before, as though the hospital was shifting around them. Lisa grabbed his arm, her face pale with terror. "We need to get out now," she gasped, but Ethan knew with sickening certainty that the hospital wasn't going to let them leave so easily. Ethan's lungs burned as they tore through the dark maze of hallways, but no matter which direction they turned, the hospital seemed to stretch into endless corridors. The air grew colder with every step, their panicked breathing fogging in front of them like they had stepped into a freezer. Tyler cursed under his breath, his bravado from earlier completely gone. "This place wasn't this big when we came in," he said, his voice trembling. Ethan didn't want to admit it, but he was thinking the same thing. The hospital wasn't just abandoned, it was alive, twisting itself into a trap. The guttural moan they'd heard from that patient's room hadn't faded. It seemed to follow them, echoing closer and closer, though Ethan couldn't tell if it came from behind, above, or the very walls themselves. At one point, the sound shifted into something worse, faint whispers, hundreds of them, layered on top of each other, chanting words too distorted to understand. Lisa clutched Ethan's arm, her fingernails digging into his skin. "It's not just one thing in here," she whispered, her eyes wide. There are more. They stumbled into another ward, this one lined with broken beds and rusted floor stands. As they passed, one of the beds groaned as though someone invisible had just sat down. Then another creaked. And another. Soon, the entire room was filled with the sound of weight shifting, springs squealing under unseen bodies. Ethan forced his eyes straight ahead, but out of the corner of his vision he swore he saw outlines, shapes lying in the beds, twitching, writhing under the thin, decayed sheets. He tightened his grip on Lisa's hand and whispered, "Don't look. Just keep moving." Tyler, however, couldn't resist. His flashlight swung across the beds, and when the beam caught one of the figures directly, the sheet flew off, revealing a gaunt, eyeless face staring straight at him. The mouth gaped open and let out a shriek so sharp it rattled the windows. Tyler screamed and stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. In the chaos, the other beds started to move. Sheets tearing away to reveal more of those emaciated figures, their bodies jerking as if shocked by electricity. The three of them bolted, leaving Tyler's flashlight behind, the glow swallowed instantly by the darkness. They found themselves in a stairwell, the metal steps groaning under their weight. Ethan hoped this would finally lead them down to the exit, but as they descended, the air thickened, carrying the coppery scent of blood. When they reached the landing, they froze. The walls were smeared with crimson handprints, some small, like children's, others unnaturally large. At the bottom of the stairwell, a set of heavy doors stood closed, but something thudded against them from the other side. Slow. Heavy. Like someone, or something, was pacing just beyond. Tyler grabbed the railing, his voice breaking. "We can't go that way. We'll be trapped." Lisa was crying now, silent tears streaking her face, but she shook her head furiously. "We have to try. We can't stay in here." Ethan made the choice for them. They turned and rushed up instead of down, the stairwell vibrating with the sound of footsteps below them. Whatever was behind that door had started climbing after them, each step echoing louder than the last. By the time they burst back into the hallway on the 4th floor, the whispers had grown deafening, circling them like a storm. Lights flickered in every direction, showing glimpses of figures lurking at the far ends of the hall, nurses in blood-stained uniforms, patients dragging their 4 poles behind them, faces blurred and stretched unnaturally. They ducked into the nearest room and slammed the door shut, their backs pressed against it as something immediately began pounding on the other side. The sound reverberated through their chests, rattling their bones. Lisa sobbed into her hands, Tyler paced frantically, and Ethan tried to steady his breathing, listening. The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It wasn't just silence, it was waiting. Then, faintly, a voice came from the far side of the dark room they had just entered. "You shouldn't have come here." Ethan's blood turned to ice. That voice wasn't coming from a ghost, it was human. Ethan froze at the sound of the voice. It was low, raspy, and carried the weight of someone who hadn't spoken in years. Tyler whipped his flashlight toward the far corner of the room, the beam jittering as his hands shook. At first, there was nothing, just a pile of discarded sheets and broken equipment. Then the shape of a man slowly emerged, hunched over, sitting on the edge of an overturned gurney. His skin looked waxy and pale, his hospital gown tattered and stained with something dark. He stared at them with hollow eyes that seemed too empty to belong to the living. "You shouldn't have come here," the man repeated, his lips cracking as he spoke. "They don't like visitors." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Who are you?" she whispered. The man tilted his head slowly, like he had to think hard to remember. "A patient. I've been here, too long." He raised one trembling hand and pointed at the door they just shut. "But you," his voice cracked into a whisper, "you let them know you're here. Now they'll follow you." Before Ethan could respond, a loud scraping sound echoed from the hallway outside. Something metallic dragged across the floor, moving closer to the door. The man's expression twisted with terror. "They found us," he hissed. Don't let them see you bleed. The pounding began again, this time harder, shaking the frame of the door. Tyler shouted, "We've got to get out of here." He yanked the door open against Ethan's protest, and the hallway flooded with flickering light. Ethan caught only a glimpse of what stood there before Tyler pulled him through. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a nurse's cap tilted on its head. But its face was all wrong, mouth stretched wide into a permanent grin, eyes black pits that seemed to drink in the light. In its hand, it dragged a rusty 4-pole, the metal wheels screeching against the floor. They sprinted down the hall, the nurse creature lurching after them in jerky strides. Ethan risked a glance back and saw that the patient they had left behind hadn't followed. Instead, he remained sitting in the room, his empty eyes fixed on them, lips moving silently as though praying. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a set of double doors labeled "Psychiatric Ward." Lisa shoved against them, and to their relief, they opened. Inside was a long hallway lined with padded cells. The air was suffocatingly stale, filled with the faint scent of rot. The moment they entered, the doors slammed shut behind them with a metallic clang. Tyler spun, pulling at the handles, but they didn't budge. "We're trapped," he yelled. The whispers returned, louder now, threading through the air like voices just behind their ears. From inside the cells, shapes began pressing against the padded doors. At first, they looked like shadows, but then pale hands slipped through cracks in the seams, fingers clawing at the air. One of the doors burst open, and a figure staggered out. Its head lolled unnaturally to one side, eyes glazed, mouth whispering fragments of words in a frantic loop, "Don't cut, don't cut, don't cut." Lisa screamed, grabbing Ethan's arm. More doors began to open, more figures spilling into the hall. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if their bones bent the wrong way. The three of them backed up, hearts pounding, but the crowd closed in from every direction. Then, at the far end of the corridor, a red light blinked to life above an exit door. It cast the hallway in a hellish glow, illuminating the figures closing in. "Run!" Ethan shouted, and they charged forward, shoving past the twisted patients. Hands clawed at their clothes and hair, voices shrieking in broken harmony. Ethan kicked one figure aside and threw his shoulder against the exit door. To his relief, it burst open, spilling them into another stairwell. They slammed it shut behind them, the shrieks muffled on the other side. All three of them gasped for air, trembling. Tyler wiped sweat from his face with a shaking hand. "This place it's alive," he whispered. But before Ethan could respond, they heard it again, the dragging screech of the 4-pole echoing somewhere below them, slowly, steadily climbing the stairs. The metallic screech climbed each step like a countdown, echoing up the stairwell. Ethan's skin crawled at the sound. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't frantic. Whoever, or whatever, dragged that 4-pole wasn't chasing them. It was stalking, confident that no matter what they did, escape was impossible. Lisa clutched Ethan's sleeve, whispering through clenched teeth, "It's coming. We have to move." They bolted up the stairs, their footsteps clanging off the iron steps, the air growing hotter and thicker with every floor they passed. The stairwell seemed endless, each landing leading only to more shadow, more rust-stained walls. Tyler cursed between ragged breaths, "We're going in circles. This isn't right. I swear we've already passed this floor." Ethan noticed it too, the same cracked exit sign, the same graffiti scrawled in red across the concrete wall, "They never leave." He didn't point it out. He couldn't. The panic already on Lisa's face was bad enough without confirming the impossible. Finally, they pushed through a door onto what looked like the top floor. But this wasn't like the rest of the hospital. It was clean. The tiles weren't cracked. The walls were pristine white. Fluorescent lights hummed steadily overhead, too bright after so much darkness. The sudden shift made Ethan's stomach twist. Hospitals didn't heal themselves. Rows of patient rooms lined the corridor, their doors neatly shut. Each had a clipboard hanging beside it, names written in careful black ink. As Lisa leaned in to read one, her face drained of color. "Ethan," she whispered, stepping back, these are our names." Ethan snatched a clipboard off the wall. Sure enough, in clean lettering, it read, Ethan Cole. Admitted, September 26, status, in progress. His heart plummeted. He ripped another free, Tyler's name. Then Lisa's. Every door in the hallway bore one of their names, as if the hospital had been waiting for them. The three of them stood frozen, the lights above them beginning to flicker. At the far end of the hall, one of the doors creaked open on its own. Inside, shadows writhed like smoke. A low voice, hollow and echoing, seeped out, "Patient, admitted." Tyler snapped. "Nope. Nope, I'm not playing this game." He turned and sprinted back toward the stairwell, but the door they had come through was gone. In its place was a blank wall, spotless white tile from floor to ceiling. Tyler slammed his fists against it, screaming curses, but it didn't even ripple. The air thickened with the sound of muffled sobbing. It wasn't Lisa. It wasn't Ethan. It was coming from every room around them. One by one, the doors began to rattle, the sound of fingernails scraping from the inside. The sobs grew louder, mixing with laughter, shrieks, whispers, a symphony of madness pressing in on all sides. "Don't open them," Ethan warned, grabbing Lisa's wrist as she instinctively stepped back from one door. But it was too late. Tyler spun around and yanked open the nearest door, screaming, "Show me what you want." The light inside the room was blinding, flooding the hallway. Ethan shielded his eyes, but in that split second, he saw something impossible. Tyler strapped to a bed, for lines snaking into his arms, his mouth pried open with metal clamps as shadowy figures loomed over him. Then, with a slam, the door shut, and Tyler was gone. Only silence remained, broken clipboard clattering to the floor. Lisa's scream echoed through the corridor. She lunged at the door, pounding it with her fists. "Tyler! Tyler!" But Ethan pulled her back, his chest tight with horror. "He's gone. It's what it wants. Don't let it take you too." The dragging sound returned, louder now, closer. At the far end of the hall, the nurse creature appeared again, its grin stretched wider, black pits of eyes locked onto them. The four poles squealed as it scraped against the floor, leaving a dark trail behind. Ethan grabbed Lisa's hand, yanking her down another hallway that had appeared where none existed before. The walls closed in tighter, the fluorescent lights above popping one by one, plunging sections of the corridor into darkness. Behind them, the nurse's footsteps clicked steadily, always the same distance away no matter how fast they ran. They burst into another room, an operating theater. Rusted surgical lights hung overhead, tables laid out with instruments that looked too sharp, too clean. The smell of disinfectant burned Ethan's nose. On the far wall, a massive window revealed the observation deck, and to his horror, shadowy silhouettes lined the glass. Dozens of them, watching silently. Lisa's grip tightened around his hand. "They're waiting for us," she whispered, trembling. And then the overhead lights snapped on, flooding the room in sterile white. A voice crackled from hidden speakers, "Prepare the patients for surgery." The voice over the intercom sent a shiver down Ethan's spine, cold and surgical, like it wasn't speaking to people but to objects. Lisa stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the cold metal of the operating table. The sterile brightness of the lights above washed out her face, making her look as pale as the corpses they'd seen earlier. Ethan grabbed her hand again, whispering harshly, "Don't look at them. Don't give them anything." But it was impossible not to look. The silhouettes in the observation deck loomed behind the glass, motionless yet oppressive, as though their eyes pressed weight directly into Ethan's chest. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. On the table beside them lay a set of surgical tools. Scalpels gleamed like they'd been polished that morning. Clamps and syringes were laid out in neat rows. But none of it was covered in dust. None of it was old. Ethan's stomach churned. This place, it's still being used. Lisa's breathing came in ragged gasps. By who? She whispered, her voice breaking. The speakers crackled again. Proceed. The double doors slammed shut behind them with a metallic bang. A lock clicked. And then, from the far corners of the room, two figures emerged. They wore surgeons' gowns and masks, but their movements weren't human. They jerked forward in unnatural motions, like marionettes controlled by unseen strings. The closer they came, the stronger the stench of rot became, seeping from their pale, gloved hands. Lisa screamed as one of the surgeons lunged, slamming her down onto the table with strength that didn't match its frail appearance. Ethan tried to pull her free, but the other figure grabbed him from behind, cold hands clamping down on his arms. The force was relentless, dragging him toward another table, straps already waiting. Ethan thrashed, his heart hammering in his chest. No. Let me go. His voice cracked, but the figures didn't respond. Their blank masks didn't shift, didn't acknowledge him. They just continued their task with mechanical precision. Lisa's cries for help echoed through the room, raw and terrified. Ethan's back hit the table, the straps tightening around his wrists and ankles on their own, as though the leather had come alive. His flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam sweeping wildly until it landed on the ceiling above him. For a moment,